Welcome to episode 6 of the CSA podcast. We will be talking about the Asian American experience, just like our experience as students of color at Cal Poly, and just like outside of Cal Poly in general. But yes, I'm Christy. I'm a second year graphic communication major. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm from the Bay Area, so like Sunnyvale, Cupertino area. But yes, I will popcorn to Aisha.
I'm Aisha. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm also from the Bay. I'm from South San Jose, and I'm also a second year graphic communications major. I'll popcorn to Benison.
Hi, everybody. My name is Benison, or Ben, whatever. I use he, they pronouns. I'm a fifth year civil engineering major, also from the Bay Area, Oakland. And I'll popcorn it to Jordan.
Hi, I'm Jordan. I'm a second year computer science major, pronouns are he, him. And I'm one of the social chairs for CSA. I'll popcorn it off to Michelle.
Hi, my name's Michelle. I use she, her pronouns. I am a second year graphic communication major and also from the Bay. So graphic communication in the house. And also it's so cool that we're all from the Bay. So love that.
Yes.
I think, yeah, we'll pass back to Christy.
All right. Yay. We're all from NorCal. I did not know that. But yes. I was thinking, I don't know if we all mentioned like what positions we are in our clubs, but I guess we can like go around, and I guess one question I have, because I actually don't know this, like even for Jordan and Michelle, like why you took on the positions that you took on, or like I guess like what made you want to get involved in like cultural clubs. I guess I'll just pass that question to any of y'all if you want to answer that.
I can start off. It's kind of a funny story. I don't know if you would consider it funny, but like initially my intent, well, my intention was to run for LDT, which is Lion Dance Team, which is part of CSA, and do some kind of leadership position there. A big part of it, obviously, being that I really enjoyed the club and I really enjoy like line dancing as well. Also, a small facet of this is that because I'm in the honors program, I need to do a leadership position at some point at Cal Poly, and like CSA was something that I cared a lot about, and I figured when I didn't get a position on the line dance team that I would at least try to run for CSA. And do you want us to talk about our position specifically, or just like being a leader in the club?
I guess like being a leader in the club, like just like your experience, or like, because I mean you do have some influence when you like take that position in the club. So I guess like what made you want to like step up to that?
I think the main thing, or the main motivating factor for me, which I imagine is probably a lot of what motivates most people to run for leadership, is the effect of previous leadership on me. Like a lot of the previous socials and board members made me feel very welcome in CSA, especially considering that Cal Poly is not a very diverse campus. It really helped me find a way to stay really proud of my culture, and also still, but also still have like a lot of fun with it. And that's a lot of the reason why I was motivated to join CSA board in the first place.
Yeah, I feel that. I feel like when you look up to a leader, you kind of like, once they move on to like their next stage, you kind of want to like step into those shoes. That's kind of like, I guess like for me, like I'm CSA's videographer. Like my big Koichi was also CSA videographer, and like seeing him like edit these super cool videos, and then like seeing people get like super hyped about events because of them, I was like, oh, it's such a cool way to like be able to represent the club, and kind of like have that influence in that sense, like in a visual sense. Because I think like I don't know, I feel like videos, it's kind of a way like people outside of the club can also get a grasp of CSA or just like the cultural club in general. So I think for me that was some incentive to run for that board position.
That's so cool because you like combined GRC with your culture.
Yeah, GRC.
Kind of nice. Yeah, I am the director of PR for ISA, and I think to answer your question, when I like, it's very similar to what Jordan was saying about like looking up to a leader and then stepping into their role. Like the current president of ISA was the director of PR last year, and she's also running like the Bollywood dance team, and she's like doing a lot this year. And it kind of almost reminded me that like in a space with so many white people who make their presence like very, very known wherever you go on campus, you know, that I'm also allowed to make my presence known in a strange way. Like I'm also allowed to take up space and like try to like make something out of my time here, which is really fun as a like a brown girl to like see another brown girl killing it and be like, oh, like that could easily be me. Like I don't have to be afraid of like a leadership position.
Yeah. It's definitely like it kind of ties back to that idea of representation. I feel like Cal Poly, it's like really hard. I remember like when I was looking at colleges, I was literally like whenever I visited campus, okay, I guess the only time I visited campus was like one time. But like when I visited campus, I feel like you subconsciously look for people that kind of look like you just because you want to have that like reassurance that someone will understand your culture. So I think, yeah, it's always cool to be inspired by like people who are already in cultural clubs.
That's
Yeah.
interesting. Oh wait, you go, Benjamin.
Okay. I was gonna say, that was like one of the important things for me is like creating a space for people who look like me. And I'm much older than all of you. Y'all are second years. I'm a fifth year. So I've held a couple positions in my club. My third year, I was a social events chair. This year, or last year, I was the treasurer for executive board, and this year I'm the culture chair. Um, Also, interrupt me if my internet starts lagging so I can stop talking. um, but it the reason I joined the club was to feel safe, and then to pursue a position was to pursue making sure that space still existed in my head, and to improve upon that space and make it even safer and make it even more welcoming for people because PCE is Filipino Cultural Exchange. So it's supposed to be a cultural exchange, and not just Filipinos are supposed to be in that space. So for me, it was ensuring that not only Filipinos were welcome, but also anybody who needed a space within culture could talk about culture, learn about culture. That's really why, like, I pursued so many years of being on staff.
Yeah, I really see that in like PCE and being able to open up the space to like anyone. And that's one of the reasons why like I joined PCE this year and just the entire process of like passing and just like finding out who my kuyate was. That was like really fun for me. This is exciting. But yeah, I'm really happy to be a part of PCE this year. But I guess like going off of Christy's original question about like what made me want to run for the position of art director and kind of tying in like my GRC and my creative side into a leadership role was something that I wanted to do. And yeah, like Jordan said, I also did feel the effects of like previous board and previous leadership. And honestly, CSA kind of fell into my lap. Like I did not expect to join a cultural club my first year when I initially came to Cal Poly. And yeah, I remember it just came out of nowhere. But like once I became a part of CSA and once I went to like joined a couple events, I was like, wow, the people here are like really welcoming, and like this idea of creating a safe space like was very apparent. So just wanting to be a part of it more and combining like what I enjoy doing, which was designing and like the artsy side. So yeah.
Yeah, it's fun to be able to, I guess, like use the skills you learn in class for, I guess, like kind of indirectly like a cause you care about, like creating safe space for people who look like you. Um, but yeah, also, Benson, I wanted to ask you more about like what you said about defining the moment. Is that what you said? Like, what was
Oh
that about
yeah.
again?
So context, before we went live, we were talking, and I asked the question of like, was there a defining moment at Cal Poly in general that like kind of brought you back to your culture or like made you realize like how either connected or how much you want to be connected to your culture just because we are in a predominantly white institution. Like there are certain circumstances or moments where it's like, oh shit, like this is my identity. Because I feel like for a lot of us, we don't realize it, but as students of color, we're not just students, but we're also like liaisons for other students. We're working, we're in clubs that are super big or super small and trying to establish a space. But for a lot of our white counterparts, they can just be students. And I think we're literally just going through identity crisis through all of college. And I think like defining moments that help you find that identity. So yeah, if y'all have any like defining moments that you can think of, not to put you on the spot.
Hmm.
I guess one that I could definitely shout out is the Chinese New Year banquet last year. Um, and this kind of ties into like my love for line dance, but like being able to have like the friends that I met in the dorms who are like all of like different ethnicities and um having them come and take part and see like what we put together for our like Chinese culture and like the performance of like lion dance and like the food and just the atmosphere and decorations as well like that was really meaningful for me and that like that really solidified like a a very poignant like pride. Um, not to steal Thomas your word that you just put in the chat, but like it was just like a very I would probably consider that like one of those like defining moments for me because um it made me feel very proud of my culture and it made me excited to share it as well.
Mm.
Where I just want to say, like, huge props to Lion Dance. I remember like seeing your performances last year, and I was like blown away because it honestly looks like it takes so much like hard work and dedication, and just like the way that y'all like are able to stand on top of each other like that and like lift the heads. I'm like, how do you do that? So cool.
So it's a lot of practice, and you gotta you don't see all the times we fall. Well, ideally, you don't.
The way that you described the Chinese New Year banquet just reminds me of like walking into Diwali banquet too, as like a brown person. That was like the coolest experience because it felt like a culture shock. Like going from the Bay, I know we're all from the Bay, and the Bay is so like, I mean, you could easily say it's like a kind of like an Asian hotspot. Like you're kind of always comfortable, or at least more comfortable than you are here. And so to like walk in a room full of people like dressed like traditional Indian wear was like, wow, like this is such a strange like feeling in a really good way. And it just kind of reminds me of that, like how special it is that you get to be a part of an organization that creates that feeling for other people. That's so awesome.
Yeah, I think it's really cool that like being in this position, you get to be part of like creating that feeling for like, I guess first years coming in. But yeah, I guess to answer the question, I think my moment is actually like the opposite. It was the CSA Zoom bombing actually that happened spring of last year. it was kind of like a wake up call for me because I think before that event happened, actually, I'll just provide some context for what happened. Essentially, like, for those who aren't familiar with the Zoom bombing, we were having, or CSA was having a general meeting, and then a bunch of strangers just like Zoom bombed the meeting, and then they like annotated a lot of like hateful symbols, and they just shouted like racial slurs and that kind of thing. And so then we had to shut down the meeting and then start a new one and then continue with the meeting that way. But yeah, with that aside, like when that happens, like before that event, I had always been the type of person when thinking about like culture and politics, I was always like out of sight, out of mind, right? Because I would like see so many news headlines about like just American politics in general, and I would be like, I guess so like I didn't want to like pay attention to what was going on because I kind of wanted to live in like the safe like Bay Area bubble. But then when the Zoom bombing happened, I think that's when I really started to like understand that like I can't just like turn away and pretend that this isn't happening. And then it made me think a lot about like my cultural identity, especially like seeing all the cultural clubs and just like the community at Cal Poly like come together after that. It was kind of like eye-opening to me to see that like, oh, we're all here at Cal Poly like uplifting each other and like here to support each other. And I had like never really seen it that way before. Like I had always just thought like, oh, it's like to find your people, you know, just like social circles, just purely like very social. Like I didn't really think that much about the cultural aspect of it. So I think that in a sense, like I guess like defined like my understanding, or like kind of like was the catalyst of me thinking about like my own cultural identity and what it means to be like a student of color at Cal Poly. Because that's when I actually felt like explicit racism like directed toward me and like people I care about. But yeah, I guess it's like very different from like the aspect of like cultural pride, but I think for me I just needed like a wake up call.
Yeah, I feel like. Oh no, I keep cutting you off. You can speak. I'm so sorry.
Okay. And then after I talk, you can talk. But yeah, Christy, what you said that also like really resonates with me. I guess growing up in the Bay, since I'm like constantly surrounded by yeah, the Bay is just like a diverse place, and like the school that I went to, it was very Asian, so it was easy for me to, I guess, kind of forget about like my identity as an Asian American. And yeah, honestly, it wasn't like a huge part of my life growing up. Um and yeah, so when that Zoom bombing happened, like I remember feeling like shocked. And in like the moment that it happened, I like froze. I like could not believe that it was actually happening, and like I was being like targeted in a way because that had never happened before. And so yeah, like Christy said, just major wake up call and being like, okay, like I am like in a way like I'm an outsider and I'm like different. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, going off of what y'all said, I think it's like very, I wouldn't say beautiful because of the circumstance that had to happen to create that, but like it's very powerful to see how your culture can radicalize you and like make you aware of just like injustice in general. Because the Bay did put us in like this bubble, and we do kind of self like voluntarily place ourselves in an Asian bubble almost by being in these orgs, and like we do need to acknowledge that like privilege of like we can feel safe in these spaces because there are a lot of people that look like us in these spaces because a lot of Asian people go to PWIs. But I think a defining moment for me was like over the summer, and I'm not saying this for clout, that's weird. But we were going to a lot of protests downtown in Slow when the Black Lives Matter movement was like really, really like there was like gumption behind it here in Slow, and that was really empowering to see. But I like was able to interact with a lot of the organizers, and like they like talked to us a lot about like why Filipinos and why Asian Americans in general are very important to the movement, and like why we need to support other movements. But there was an instance where we were like standing there and doing chants and rallies, and there was one that they had like put in that was specifically for the Filipinos in the crowd, and like the basis behind it is isang bagsak, which means when one falls, we all fall. So like we need to support each other to make sure like that doesn't happen, or when it does happen, we're there to pick each other up. And like it was such a like empowering and like very like eye-opening experience, because I was there with my friends who were also in the club, but we were there for other people, and like to be able to serve a higher purpose than just our culture, and to be able to uplift voices and other cultures that have been oppressed for so long by using our culture as like a way to like help that was like a really defining moment for me as like a old person.
Yeah, that's really cool. I feel like vocalizing something and like chanting something makes such a big difference to like actually saying something, especially when you're like surrounded by a crowd and like everyone is saying the same thing. I feel like that's definitely really powerful. I don't know, I think at least when I think of like my family and like I guess like Chinese culture, the way I grew up in it, it was a very like I don't know if it's just my family, but it just feels like a lot more quiet. Like in terms of like being Chinese, I feel like we, at least my family or like the cultural community that I grew up in as a kid, like we didn't really vocalize things, and like we never would be the type, like I wish we did, but we would never be the type to like be very expressive about like solidarity or anything like that. But yeah, I don't know. That's probably different with like different Asian cultures too. I was wondering like what y'all thought about that. Like your family was kind of the same, or like your community was kind of the same or different.
In my experience, yeah, like growing up in my family, and I felt like a lot of the times like my culture was being compared to like other cultures, or in a sense like I felt like I yeah, we were being compared, or like our culture were, like pitted against each other in some way. I don't know if that was anyone else's experience or just mine, but yeah.
No, yeah, I think like we should be careful not to like generalize everybody's experiences, because our experiences are our own. But like I definitely did experience that, especially since like Filipinos are stereotyped to be like, oh, like they're the successful ones, they're like nurses and engineers, and it's a very much so like the use of like the model minority, to like horizontally oppress other minority groups, and like to make sure like we're focused on each other and we're competing with each other, instead of like, hey, like why are they pitting us against each other? They're all the way up there. We should be happy for one another and supporting each other. And that's like such a really big ploy to like divide and conquer, um, instead of like realizing like you need to just take a step back and like really, um, analyze that, because like in my family it was very much so the adults were the only ones that could speak on things. If you defied that, you were in trouble. um and then it's like, well, we're doing this, why can't they do it better, or why can't they do it, well, we're working hard too. And it's like, no bro, like, sorry, gendered language, but like, no, like, that's not how we should be thinking. And like obviously the older generation grew up in a different culture, and thankfully we are moving away from that, hopefully. But yeah, that's like my experience and like what I've thought of.
Just to like talk more, you said something really interesting about how like elder people, especially in like a lot of Asian households, are like considered, you have to like, I think we like I don't know, I think misconstrue the word respect with like silence sometimes. Like you really are not allowed to go against your parents' opinions, like because it's quote unquote disrespectful. And I really felt that during like the Black Lives Matter protests, like that time that was happening during the summer. I don't know who brought it up, but it was like such a like, you like enter your own household and you can't talk about what's going on around the like world outside because you want to like show respect. That's such a, I think that is an experience that a lot of Asian kids can relate to, just because our parents also grew up in households where they were silenced, and so they have that idea in their head that, oh, this is what respect looks like. And so if my kid doesn't show that, then they're being disrespectful, instead of making like a safe environment where you can talk about anything. And it's interesting to think about how that will change, or if that will change when like we have kids, you know, and they're born into like like if we do, and they're like born to the children of immigrants. I don't know.
I can actually speak to that a little because I had like a pretty like a brief discussion with my dad about it, because my dad is the child of, well, technically I think he's like second generation, but his mom is directly an immigrant. Um, though I think his dad was born here. Um, but it's like when I was talking to him about like, because in my experience, I've grown up in a household where I've always felt really comfortable disagreeing with my parents and being able to talk back or like tell my parents like I don't think that's right. And as a matter of fact, like I had several discussions about like the Black Lives Matter and protests over the summer with my dad, um, which was I recognize as like a not it's a privilege that not everyone has, but I'm internally grateful for it because I think it made me a better person. Um, and I asked him like, is this like how you grew up? Is this kind of a household where like you're very okay with like me choosing my own choices, giving me a lot of freedom, and like in some sense not raising me in like the stereotypical strict Asian household? Like, um, what is like your motivation for that? And he mentioned that like as a kid, like he experienced that stereotypical strict like Asian household. Um, and what he said, which was kind of was really funny to me, is like as a kid, he always said, um, "I don't want my kids to have to deal with what I had to deal with." And I think that's something that a lot of people resonate with, and a lot of people agree with. Is like, um, there's definitely a time and a place for different parenting styles, but being Asian American, being offered certain liberties, being growing up in certain like backgrounds, like there's a lot more opportunity um, to be raised differently and to be in an environment that supports you regardless of whether or not you agree. Um, though that being said, I still think that respecting my parents is incredibly important to me, even if that doesn't mean, but that to me, that doesn't mean that I can't disagree with them or I can't have conversations with them.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what she said, or like I relate with what she said in terms of my family. Like my parents are also similar. Actually, they used to be really strict, like for my older sister. She's actually like 10 years older than me, so it's kind of like one generation and then the next generation. But they're really strict with her, and then I think after that they like loosened up. I don't know if they like got tired or something. But now they're like pretty loose and they kind of like give me the freedom to make my own decisions. But I guess like going off of like the idea of like respecting your parents, like how do y'all show love to your family? Because I know for me, like I don't know if it's just me and like my family and like how I was raised, but like saying I love you is like really uncomfortable, or like it just feels awkward to me. I like don't know if y'all can relate, or like if that's something that's exchanged like regularly vocally, but I'm just like bad at vocalizing affection, and I think like my parents feel the same way too. So I don't know like what your experience is with that.
Just gonna read out a couple of the responses that we have in chat right now. Thomas said by getting good grades. And the Bacon King, which I believe is Justin, said by being number one. And then Thomas said by being a STEM A major, which you know, I think those are all being said in jest to some extent. But
Oh my gosh, Johnny Kim. I don't know if y'all have heard of Johnny Kim. Have you?
No.
is he like the astronaut that like was like a captain as well, like of the military and like has like multiple degrees or something?
Yeah, people joke that he's like like every Asian parent's dream because he is a former SEAL, he's a doctor, and he's an astronaut, and he's only 37 years old. So he's kind of like the legend, that people joke about. It's kind of insane, like, yeah. But yes, expectations.
Oh my goodness. I'm glad that my family, when they raised me, like there were like certain expectations set, and but my parents are always very like supportive, which I'm so grateful for. Like supportive in me trying to I guess like find my passion, and like they were the ones who actually introduced me to GRC, which is kind of like, like an artsy major. And so yeah, they've always been supportive, and like saying I love you was it was a normal thing to do in my household. Like, my parents would always tell me that they loved me, which I didn't know was like not I didn't know it was like something that um Asians like typically didn't get. So yeah.
I def
Yeah.
oh,
I think
sorry, go ahead.
but okay, I guess I'll talk. I think it's really interesting that y'all bring up like expectations from your family and like STEM and all that because we literally had a culture talk for PCE last week about like generational trauma, like your identity, and like how the generation before you will like create expectations from the like success and the hardships that they've gone through, and you kind of feel guilted into doing it just because it's like, well, they worked really hard, so like I need to like kind of pay it forward by doing what they want. But I think with me it's like I did go into STEM because my parents wanted me to. um but like as you get older, and like this is tying back to like everything we've talked about, it's like I kind of was always a child that was like super quiet and like was agreeable with my parents just because I was the only son, so they kind of favored me. And I was the youngest. But like as I got older, I was able to talk back more because I finally had the vocabulary to like say what I wanted to say without sounding disrespectful, and or it just sounded so like far beyond their scope that they had to ask me questions. Um and like I think that's the form of like love language that my family has finally created for itself because we were so like it was rough when I was younger. It was like we finally are able to communicate, not just because like there is no language barrier, but it was like a matter of how to communicate that we didn't really understand. And I think with age, it really helped to develop that.
I guess for me, like this is kind of building off of like what Michelle was saying earlier. But like I also grew up in a household where it was very normal to like show affection and say I love you and that kind of thing. Um, I think because of that, like or I don't know because of that, but like an interesting thing for like as an aspect of that too is that because of that, I feel like really uncomfortable saying I love you to like like people I don't know very well. Just because like it feels way too intimate to be using like freely, I guess. I don't I know but like I know like that's not that varies a lot for different people. And like I would say like I'm not I don't know. I guess I don't really know like I feel like I'm pretty open with like communicating about like how I'm feeling, my emotions and like my affection and that kind of thing. Um but at the same time it's like I I'm almost much more affectionate towards family than anyone else. just because I feel more comfortable in that situation.
That's interesting because for me, it's actually the opposite. I'm like very comfortable with saying like love you or like I love you to all my friends, but then it's like, yeah, like with family, I'm like, oh, like I don't know how to communicate how I'm feeling. Like I care about you, but I just feel awkward expressing it. Yeah, it's like a interesting, I guess, like aspect of I guess how I deal personally with like love languages and family. Um, but yeah, I feel like in American culture, just like traditionally, it's like much more common to be very like vocal and like direct about those kind of things. And I was wondering, like, I guess just like transitioning a little bit to like, do you feel like do you feel kind of like you're caught in between? Like, there's like an Asian culture and then American culture, and you kind of like don't know where you fit between that? Or do you feel pretty confident, like, I'm American, or like I feel more American than I am Asian, and I resonate with American culture more? Like, I guess like what are your thoughts on that?
I feel like for me personally, like I can't even like quantify at like how much of each culture I feel like at any given point in time. But like I'll do things that are Indian and then feel really Indian, and then I'll go and like hang out with like a separate group of friends who are like a little like whiter, and I'll feel like really American, and I'm like I feel like in some situations I feel more than the other. And I actually like went through like a whole like identity crisis like in the beginning of freshman year, where I was like, I have white friends for the first time in my entire life coming to this school. What the heck do I do with them? Like, what do I talk about? And I was like, what the heck? And I started like, I don't know, like I was kind of almost afraid that I would not be able to relate to them. And in some ways, like I cannot relate to them this with the same depth that I can relate to like my brown female friends, because they just experience the same things as me and they communicate like, far more similarly. But like I've started doing stuff like, I don't know, like door dashing Shalimar, or like introducing them to Bollywood films, and like, and it just made me realize like nothing is 50-50, you know, like not, and definitely not like anyone's cultural identity, or maybe it's just a me thing, but like everything is some like push and pull, especially coming to this school. That was like a huge like, oh, like I'm not just like one person. I'm like this like mixture of so many things, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Like to echo that, like I definitely feel like how like what culture I feel like is so contextual. Because like with my friends who are not like specifically Chinese, then like I feel a lot more Chinese. But then like on the opposite end of the spectrum, like I'll talk to my relatives overseas and I'll feel like the most like Americanized person in the world. Like especially trying to communicate over with a language barrier and like seeing all my cousins like I mean it for most of them it is like their first language and they're just communicating super naturally and I'm just struggling to like get string the words together in a coherent sentence and like I'm tapping on my mom's shoulder like wait what does that mean like it's so difficult to like feel authentically like Chinese in that situation where it's just like, oh my gosh, like I don't know how to communicate. I feel so like I feel so lost. And it's just it's such a spectrum of like where I feel like I belong sometimes.
Yeah, I totally I agree with like everything that you said there, Jordan. Like when I go back to China, my mom acts as like she's like acts like the translator between like me and my grandparents, and it's so bad. The only things that I can like talk about in Chinese are like food and like ordering food, but I feel like that's important. And what you said about like being on a spectrum, right? That also resonates with me, and yeah, like I totally feel like at times I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess it depends like who I'm around and who I'm with. But I also feel like I've been asked this question before, and at times like there is no like, oh, I feel like American or I feel like Chinese. Like I feel like in between there's like this, like we have our own identity as like Asian Americans too. Like that's its own separate thing, separate from like, oh, being like American and being Chinese. Like we have this like whole new experience as well, for me as like a child of an immigrant. So yeah.
Do you ever feel like you've had to like represent? I feel like for me, I feel like an imposter sometimes because like Jordan said, when I go to Hong Kong, my Canto's so bad. It's like so embarrassing. But then when I come here, it's like people expect me to like know everything about like or like people who aren't Chinese. They kind of have like a subconscious expectation, like, oh, your family's from Hong Kong, like what's this? Or like how do you say this? Or blah blah blah. Like do you feel like you've had like the pressure of like showing people like this is my culture, it's like super cool, like this is something that matters to me and like I and like kind of wanting them to appreciate it and kind of like I guess having that being in that situation.
Yeah. I definitely experienced that a lot with like my younger cousins because like my uncle was really young when he came here, so he was like Americanized very young because my grandparents chose to like assimilate him by like not teaching him really the language at all. So like he kind of lost a lot of his culture in that sense of language, and like language is such a like deep connection with culture a lot of the time that because of that there's like a little disparity with even what my like younger cousins in this family are experiencing when they're only speaking English versus my cousins who are also here but can speak fluent Tagalog, which is one of the languages in the Philippines. um and like I don't know why I did, but I volunteered to be like the representative of the Philippines to my younger cousins to try to like make them proud of who they are because they are mixed race. They are like a quarter white, so like a lot of the time they can be white passing unless they're like super tan. And it's like I need to teach them like, oh, like this is why you call me kuya. This is why you call your like ate's ate, which is like big brother, like big sibling, in Tagalog. And it kind of is very interesting to see, like even going back to the last discussion of like the context of that which you are placed in will cause you to almost, I can't say code switch because you're not really switching languages most of the time because we are very English centric, but like culture switching, I guess you could say, in terms of like making it digestible for people who may not be in that culture, and or just like need to be like pushed in it, like, hey, like you are a part of this culture, it's fine. um but in terms of like my classmates here, I'm like, I'm not afraid to just be like, yeah, like this is what my club does. This is like what I do on the daily. Oh, like you want to hear about this? Like I'm very forward with it because it's like, I don't know, we're in such a predominantly white culture in America. Why are we adjusting ourselves to fit that? Because I don't know, that's not my identity. Why are you pushing it on me?
Such a great point. I think so many ethnic kids like water down their like love for their culture to, as you were saying, like make it more palatable, right? Like if you're presenting it to someone outside your ethnicity, then you want to make it like seem very like, or you present it in a form that is more comfortable for them, but you never think about like what is this doing to me, you know? It's like almost like a subconscious like eating away at you type thing.
Yeah, it like diminishes the value of your culture by just like kind of basically whitewashing it. Because like, oh yeah, adobo, lumpia, pancit, tinikling, and it's like one, I wouldn't actually pronounce that way with my family. They would make fun of me. Two, like, there's a lot of other things about my culture that I can share, even like bad things about my culture. But you don't want to hear that, so
Yeah,
not you.
oh oh
No,
sorry, no, continue, were you saying something?
no, no, I wasn't.
Oh, okay. But yeah, I was gonna say like I relate to that a lot, like with actually my last name. So my last name in Canto is pronounced Leung, and like even if you can't pronounce it, like you can go with Lung. That like also works. But like when I was little, or even now, sometimes I like catch myself mispronouncing my own last name just to make people feel comfortable. I'm like, my last name is Leung. I'm like, I tell people I'm like, no, I'm Christy Leung, but actually it's Leung in Cantonese. And I don't even realize I'm doing it because like I started in elementary school when I would tell my teachers like my last name is Leung, and they'd be like, they like wouldn't be able to say it, and like even though it was like okay, like if you can't pronounce it, like it's totally fine. But like the other kids, they'd be like, oh, Long, like that's so funny, ha ha ha. And then obviously like as a little kid, you're like, oh, I want to be accepted. So then I started like changing my last name into a form that like people could pronounce. And then now I like look back on it and I'm like, why do I still feel the need to do that? It's still like a subconscious like fear inside me that like, oh, I have to mispronounce my last name so that people have an easier way of like referring to my surname. And so yeah, I guess like also going off of that, like were there any things in like elementary school that you felt like insecure of because that was related to your culture?
I think right off the top of my head, one thing that I've always had like a very like, and I know for a fact like so many Indian girls specifically feel this way, and some Indian boys too, is like appearance wise. Also, like if you guys know of any like appearance related things that are like inherently like tied with your culture that you like cannot get rid of, but like body hair, like especially for Indian women, like trying to kind of assimilate to like the Eurocentric beauty standard, like getting rid of your body hair for Indian girls is such a like traumatizing thing that I used to like, and I look back on it now, Christy, like you were saying, like you were like so aware of it in elementary school. It's kind of sad, like you're like 10 or 11 years old and you like already are realizing things that make you different in a bad way, and you're already like plotting a strategy for how you can like get rid of it or make yourself more palatable, right? Like, and it's not even like it's like a survival strategy, like and I know, and to this day, like I still get my upper lip waxed and I still get my arms waxed because I think like body hair is like something that a lot of like Indian kids have like excess of, and they feel the need to just like remove it. I know like my brother is like 14 and he's getting teased because he has a mustache already. Like so many Indian kids and like this really like violent relationship with their body hair. It's something that I was like aware of like starting elementary school, and I can't even believe like that's when I started getting waxed, like grade. That's so wild. Like yeah, I don't know. It's just
I feel like that's so interesting because like there's almost like the opposite thing for a lot of like Chinese people, like Chinese males, where it's like there's kind of a stereotype that Chinese people can't grow a beard, they can't grow a mustache, right? Like they can't have facial hair, and like while I grew up in a predominantly Asian area, so I never felt this, but I know for some people like it can be a little emasculating, and it's like you're not manly enough because you can't grow facial hair.
Yeah, and I think for my personal experience, a lot of it has to do with like not even looking Asian in general to a lot of people. Um, when people like to play the game, like, what race are you? I usually get a lot of like Mexican, like Hawaiian, Samoan, Tongan, Indian. I've gotten black, and like just a lot of Australian was the most recent one. I said hello, and they said, "Are you from Australia?" And I was like, what gave you that implication? But it's like being categorized as Asian, but then like a lot of people saying like you're the wrong kind of Asian because of like media and like portrayal of Asian people only being like East Asian. And like I don't know, not gonna lie, a lot of my classmates in the 5th grade didn't even know Indian people were Asian. They were like, "What?" And it's like, you didn't know that? They're on the continent. Um, so it's like, I don't know, just even looking Asian for me will like kind of stood out because I mean I had short hair like prior to 2 years ago when I decided to keep growing my hair out. So it was like even more so now, I don't look quote unquote Asian, so it's like very much so something I'm very aware of, and it's like, damn, I wonder what looking Asian is like.
Yeah, I definitely think in media there's a very narrow perception of what Asians look like. And yeah, like you mentioned, it definitely comes down to representation and just there not being enough diverse representation of what Asians look like. Um, I guess like going off of that, like, do any of you have like people in the entertainment industry that you looked up to as a kid or like as a teen just because you saw yourself in them and you're like, oh, like I have a place in like stories and like films or whatever?
I would say the first one for me that jumps to mind is Ryan Higa. On YouTube. Like I was never that big into like television, and like I didn't watch cartoons and that kind of stuff that much either, or like movies and that kind of thing. But like I watched a lot of YouTube, and like Ryan Higa being like, I mean, he was like the most. I'm pretty sure he, as like for a period of time, he was like one like the most subscribed to YouTuber um on the platform, and like that was really incredible. Like it was just like, hey, that's like that like representation, and like I at the time I didn't even think about it. Like looking, it's all in retrospect. But at the time I was just like, hey, he's really funny. I like his videos. But then in retrospect, it's like um he had a platform that not a lot of like at the time like there's not a lot of Asian representation in the media. Like most of my the most of the time that I would see like Asian in like performing stuff would be through my dad's like kung fu movies, and that kind of thing. And I mean that's a whole genre in of itself that is not very mainstream. And like um I don't think a lot like nowadays it's really cool to see like now Donnie Yen being in like American movies like Star Wars, and like just playing like or just acting as like characters, and not just not well, you could it's debatable around Rogue One like how exactly like how exactly like the kind of role he's playing, and obviously because he's a martial artist like he utilizes that in a lot of his like performances and stuff, which I think is really cool. um but yeah, it's just really cool to see him make that transition from fully like those like Hong Kong style like kung fu movies to mainstream media in the US.
I think for me it was kind of Hassan Minaj, which is kind of sad because it was so late, but I can't really remember Indian people existing in Western media before Hassan Minaj. I guess Priyanka Chopra, but like she like got her start in Bollywood, and that's how I know her. But Hassan Minaj definitely like I don't know, just watching his comedy stuff, it hits different. Like I don't even know. Yeah. But there's not really a lot of brown women in like movies, or none that I can think of, or TV shows. I guess Mindy Kaling. Um, because I don't know. I've always pondered why, and like one reason that I think it's just because I feel like brown women are the least like again, this is I'm drawing this back to Eurocentric beauty standards because this is like my like that's like the hill that I die on, right? But like I think like the like just because of our features and like the hooked noses and the like darker skin and the thicker hair, like there's so many things that are directly like opposing to the like Eurocentric standard of like hairlessness, small nose, right? Like big eyes, like that I think like we're like overlooked as like a heroine figure or like someone who could like entertain a romantic interest because we just don't fit into that mold that Western media has created. But Hasan Minhaj is like the first person that I've seen like break that sphere in a big way. But again, he's a dude, like, and he's a comedian. He's not like narrating in playing in like a story or a rom-com or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I think for me, it's really weird because of that, like, Filipinos don't look Asian. So, like, a lot of the time, a lot of Filipino actors and actresses and performers get recasted into other races. So, a lot of the time, they get casted into, like, Hispanic roles. So, like, the Lizzie McGuire show, Miranda, she was, like, a Hispanic character. She was Filipino. Um, Olivia Rodrigo is half Filipino. Vanessa Hudgens in High School Musical was Hispanic. Gabrielle Montez, but she's actually half Filipino, half German, I think. Ashley Aragosa. Oh, girl, was I that boy? Welcome back.
Sorry, I just popped up for a second. I don't know what happened.
True Jackson VP, Ashley Aragosa is Filipino. And the girl from Hannah Montana, the Oots. The one with the black girl, she's Filipino too. And like I didn't really find these things out until I was older, and I was like, so I could have had role models, but you recasted them into different races to fit marketing because no one knows what a Filipino is. Like, I mean, we are known, but it's like for like singing and like boxing, he's creep. So it's like, I don't know, like it sucks that we have to be recasted to be or re-race casted to be able to be like represented.
Wow, I did not know a lot of those roles. Dang. Wow.
That reminds me, Domix on YouTube who does like animations. I think he's also Filipino.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
I've also watched those when I was really young, and like those were always really cool. And I think it's different because he's behind the screen, like he's not him, but it's like a story's about himself, but it's all animated.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time, a lot of the representation that we actually resonate with comes from like the internet, like you were saying with like Ryan Higa. I know a lot of the time, like for like Filipinos, it was like Happy Slip, and it's like Christine, and like her whole story is like her mom would say like, "Don't forget to wear your half slip," which is like a cover, like a camisole, but it's not like Happy Slip. So like that's like why her channel is named that, and it's like Filipino representation actually.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's definitely so true what you said about marketing. Like the way they just change things just to fit marketing, and they market for Western audiences too. And so kind of like what Aisha was saying too, like about making it more digestible for like Western audiences. Oh wow, everything's coming together.
The live action of the Winx Club, how they recasted the races.
Oh no.
Yeah.
I did not know that.
Huh?
I did not know that.
Yeah, because like Musa looks Asian. They recasted her to be white, and then like Flora was Hispanic or melanated at least. She's a white girl. Yeah.
Oh no.
Wow. My eyes have been opened. Yeah, well, it is 8 p.m. and I want to be respectful of all of your time. So I'll wrap this up, even though we had a really good conversation. But I just wanted to thank you all, and also to everyone who's watching for tuning in, and for also like typing in the chat and just engaging in our discussion. And yeah, to all of you, thank you so much for sharing. I know that a lot of these topics can be like very personal, especially about like family and just like experiences. So yes, thank you so much for tuning in to episode 6 of the CSA podcast, and we will see y'all next week.
Thank you. Bye.